Welcome to Tech Rec. We're going to bring you another piece from the past in computer history. That is the TI-99 4A.
So, with all the power you have here to run all the power here, this is the one. The home computer from Texas Instruments. This is the one.
And here it is. This is a working TI-99 4A, straight out of 1981. This machine debuted for $525, manufactured by Texas Instruments. And it was a complete home computer. In fact, the Texas Instruments TI-99 4A was really the first home computer. In 1982, they actually had 35% of the home computer market. However, the TI-99 4A was not the first TI-99. In 1979, and around June, Texas Instruments released the TI-99 4 without the A. It was a $1,500 machine that was absolutely terrible. This actually includes a number of upgrades. Processor, keyboard, there was a chiclet keyboard on the TI-99 4. It was just overall too expensive and not a very big seller. When the 4A came out at $525, it kind of sold like hotcakes. And in fact, in 1982, they were selling about 30,000 of these machines a month and had about 20 million in sales before it was discontinued in the third quarter of 1982. Why was it discontinued, being so popular? Well, you had the VIC-20 to compete with at $200, and this was a $525 machine. And so what ended up happening was TI was discounting these machines to $300 and providing a $100 rebate, and even joked that it's easy to sell computers when you're paying people $100 to take them. Well, let's talk a little bit about the physical device here. So this keyboard, which you might have figured out by now, is quite terrible. Notice no dedicated backspace keys, no insert or delete keys, not dedicated ones anyway. The caps lock is a physical lock. You push it in and it stays down, and you let it go and it comes up. And that being said, is that this machine doesn't actually have uppercase and lowercase. What it has is an uppercase set, and when you type lowercase, it is just a shrunk version of an uppercase letter. I'm assuming there's a bit flag in order to indicate whether or not it's a full-size letter or not. And it's probably to save RAM, because each particular letter would use 8 bytes of space, or 8 bits of space, just for the character. And so you would need 8 bits for an uppercase I and 8 bits for a lowercase I, whereas 8 bits with a flag would just be 9 bits, and whether or not the flag was a 1 or a 0 would indicate to display an upper or a lowercase. It's actually kind of a neat idea. However, all your characters look the same. They're just different sizes. You can see that we have a function row up here. There's actually 2 colors here. It's hard to see. It's red and gray. And that corresponds to the control key. I'm actually not even sure what this, I think it's just function is what that stands for, FCTN. And that's the gray. It might even look a little blue. And this is red. And then here across the top are what they would do. So you have delete, insert, erase, clear, begin, a proc. I'm not even sure what that even does. I'm actually not sure what this one does either. And then you got redo, back, and then there's a quit. And you would access those just like you hit control keys on your computer today. So it's actually not a terrible to type on keyboard. Being the format it is, I find it really difficult to keep my fingers in the right place. There are no home indicators. So if you notice on your keyboards at home, there's typically a little notch on a couple of keyboards, usually where your index fingers will set, so that you can always feel where your fingers are supposed to be. You don't get that on this keyboard. So I find that my fingers are all over the place. It does have 2 shift keys, one being a normal size key. The enter key is small. I would think that you'd want a larger enter key and smaller shift keys, but hey, I didn't design the thing, right? So that's enough of the keyboard. Over here, we have a cartridge slot. So most of the software sold for this machine came on a cartridge, which looked like this, and it plugged in through the cartridge slot. So you just put it here and you slid it in. When you boot up the machine, it will give you an option to load the software from the cartridge that's installed, or to boot into BASIC. So the cartridge that we have today is Home Financial Decisions. I wish we had a game, but we don't. I'm hoping to get a few off of eBay and put them in here, and we'll save that for another video. So the Home Financial Decisions is just a program that basically, honestly, it's just a bunch of amortization that it does. If you're not familiar with amortization is something that would tell you how much you're going to pay for a home, how much interest, what principal and interest that you pay on each of your payments. It'll also calculate loans, car payments, and it's supposed to help you make decisions. Should I rent? Should I buy? Should I buy this house or that house? Should I take out a loan or not? Should I take out a loan? But how much is a loan going to cost me, and how much am I going to have to pay back, and how much can I afford? That's basically what Home Financial Decisions does. So it does work, and we'll put it in there and we'll try that out. So moving around the machine, on this side we have a dedicated expansion port, and this just slips up. And you notice there's a little card connector in there. And that allowed us to plug in additional peripheral devices. The other interesting thing is that this was a chainable port. So you could buy an additional device and attach other devices to that device. And you could, I don't even know if there was a limit. The pictures I've seen, and I'll show one here on the screen, are ridiculous. But you could plug in a RAM module, then some expansion boxes. You could plug in a couple of floppy drives. There's an acoustic coupler, which is just an old way of saying modem, and you could have a multi-feet long TI-99 setup. My entire table would not be long enough. So moving on to the back, over here we have a joystick port. If you know anything old school, this is plug compatible with Atari. However, it actually doesn't support Atari joysticks. The next plug here is power. So there's a 4-prong power adapter in there, very proprietary. This is actually square with 4 holes. And then over here is video output. Output on this was using a VHF modulator that basically had screw plugs on the to connect to the back of your TV. And we have all of the pieces, so we're going to do that. And then moving around to this side, we just have a secondary joystick port. I'm not sure if this supports more than one working at a time. We'll see the joysticks in just a moment. And then when we get to the front, it's pretty plain Jane. There's just a power switch over here, and this is pretty stiff, but left and right for on and off. If we look at the bottom, there's a couple of feet. Mine has a missing one. There's some information here. Actually, I haven't even read this yet. This is serial number 710076894. Now I'm assuming that all serial numbers started with a 1, so maybe this is 76,894 if they were numbered sequentially. What that would mean is it's a pretty low number out of the millions that they actually sold. And this is an early release. This was a 1982. There were additional releases of this. Some of the reasons is that you could have homebrew ROM cards, and I guess Texas Instruments didn't like people creating those and running them themselves, so they actually released updated versions that you had to have official cards in order to run on that. You can actually buy cards that have an SD card in them, and you can put images of these cards on them, and you only need one card, and you can run just about anything. Presumably, you would load those from the internet. So the first thing we're going to do is hook it up. So this is the power adapter for this thing. So this is crazy. So this is a huge box, and here's my hand for scale. So there's my hand. Hold this here. This is huge. This is actually 40 watts input, 12 watts out, and 1.2 amps out. It is a power converter for sure. It's a transformer here. When we turn this on, there is a very, very strong buzz that emits from this, from the power. I don't know if it came that way or it's just old, but it still works without any problem. But I'm guessing there was at least some buzz because they've provided enough cord here. Switch back the camera here. So they provided enough cord here. So I'm about 6 feet tall, and this cord with the power on it woo, is about 10 feet. And then this cord that actually goes to the actual machine is about a little bit, it's about 6 feet if we just do it from, a little hard to hold this way, cord to cord here. So it's about 16 feet. So I really wanted you to be far away from this, I guess, and giving you some versatility. There's this crazy little thing on the end of it. I'm not sure what this is, but it plugs in like an end-to-end extension cord. I tried pulling this apart. I can't seem to get it apart, although it does look like there's a gap in there. Let's switch back here so it's a little better. So it does look like there's a gap in there of sorts. That we could pull this apart. If I get my orientation right here on the camera. But it doesn't actually come apart. So this little green thing here, for use only with Texas Instruments adapter model AC9500 or model AC95000 with any of the following markings. And then there's a couple of little markings here. On the other side, Texas Instruments Incorporated AT0583 power supply part number 9500/2. Try and get that here where you can see it. Or how much in focus that is. And then here's the other side. I'm not sure what this does. My guess is there are magnets in here for power conditioning to try to eliminate some of the interference that that bad power on the line would cause. I'll try and find some information and get it posted in this video. But it's just a weird little adapter there. So the other thing that we have is our video connection. So there's this proprietary connector, and there's a lot of cable here, about 6 feet again, and it goes to this device. So, and it's right side up. What this device is this is the modulator. So this would convert the video signal into a TV signal. And there's a switch on here to indicate whether or not you wanted to use the computer. You put it in the TV mode. And there's an antenna mode. Keep in mind, in 1981, plenty of people still had analog rooftop antennas that just came into their house and plugged into their TV. If you plugged this in where the antenna went, then too bad, you couldn't watch TV. So this actually allowed you to connect your antenna with these screw connectors on the side here. There'd be two little clips that slid in there, and you'd tighten these down. And then when you want to watch TV, it was a physical process. You would go to bed, grab the box, and this was about 2 inches from the back of the TV. So keep that in mind. You had to reach around to the back of the TV, and it wasn't uncommon for floor model TVs, big heavy things that it was very difficult to get behind, but you'd have to get back there and flip this switch, and then you could watch TV. You flip it here if you wanted to use the computer, and on the bottom here there's a switch that, if you can see, it says, try not to get the glare here, channel select 3 or 4. Not very good printing, so I'm not sure it's going to focus too well, but depending on what channel you actually got the least amount of interference on, you could put it on channel 3 or you could put it on channel 4. So we don't have a TV like that. So we're going to connect this up to a much more modern flat panel. It's actually about 10 years old, so it's not super modern. It's only 720p. But what we've done is there's normally the cable on this would connect to the back of the TV like this. There'd be 2 connectors, and you would put them under the screw and you'd screw it down. Our flat panel doesn't have that. So what we've actually done, and this is just a coax. So your standard cable TV, your cable modem has one of these. Your cable box is going to have one of these. Just standard coax. And what we've done is stripped it apart. And inside here is a copper wire, and then there's some aluminum wire and shielding in here. So all I've done, and I'm going to have to fix it. is I've attached one wire and soldered it to the copper, and then the other side was connected to the aluminum shielding. And there's a little bit of static that we're going to see because it's inevitable. We probably would get static even if we were able to connect this up normally. But that will allow us to use just a coax to plug into the back of our TV, and we'll be able to get a signal. Will it be perfect? No, but it will serve our purposes. So the last thing that we have, joysticks. Now, unfortunately, without a game, these are totally useless to us. We might be able to find a basic program somewhere online in an archive somewhere that maybe that we could key in and play a game, create our own little game without actually finding a cartridge. But this keyboard is going to be a nightmare typing in. I do intend another video where we actually take some basic code and do something productive with it, just to demonstrate that. So look out for another video for that. But even though these controllers move around in a complete circle, I've actually read that they only support the arrows that are on there. So it's only 4 directions. So up, left, right, and down. They're digital. They're not analog. So your left, your right, up and down. It's just like that. The interesting thing about these is that the other end of these, and these are only about 4 feet long. So we have all of this crazy long power. So the things we're going to put in people's hands so that they can yank the computer off the desk is only about 4 feet. So these actually plug in together. So you can't plug in one without the other. So I'm not sure if you plugged one of these in and you could use 2 controllers. And if there were games that supported 4 controllers, you could plug in to this port that's on the back. Again, this is plug compatible with Atari, but it doesn't actually work with Atari, and Atari controllers don't work with this. There was an adapter that you could purchase that made your Atari controllers work with this. And in fact, one company actually had reported back in the days with this that they sold more Atari converters for this than they actually sold joysticks for this, because the Atari joysticks were actually better joysticks. They were analog, where these are digital. So we're going to plug this all in, and we're going to hook it up to the TV. And unfortunately, I don't have a coaxial capture card. Once upon a time I did. As a matter of fact, it was a Voodoo card. That's going back. A Voodoo all-in-wonder. But I don't have a capture card for coax, so we're going to set up a camera to point at our screen. It's not as bad as you think if you can get past the static from the interference that we see. So we're going to hook it up. We're going to turn it on. We're going to play with the cartridge. We're going to play with basic. Then we're going to take the machine all apart, and we're going to look inside, and we're going to talk a little bit about history and the hardware we find inside. So before we do that, this machine has 16 kilobytes of RAM, 3 megahertz 16-bit processor. It is in fact the first 16-bit home computer that was ever on the market. Has 32K of ROM. Could expand it with 32 more K of RAM, and you could add a tape drive, or you could add floppy drives. There were a whole bunch of peripherals that you could use. You could even get a modem for this and a terminal emulation. But by today's standards, this machine is not even a calculator. I mean, it will calculate, obviously, but it's just terrible. And I want to do a little comparison here. So this RAM chip is 16 gigabytes. So this machine is 16. This machine is 16K, and this is a 16 gigabyte chip. So what does that mean in a comparison? Well, to give you a clue, 1 megabyte is 1,000 kilobytes. And if you know all of this, I'm sorry I'm teaching you to suck eggs here, but 1 megabyte is 1,000 kilobytes. That means 1 megabyte of memory would equal 64 of these Texas Instruments machines, these TIs. So just to get 1 megabyte of RAM, you would need 64 of these machines. And if you do the math on that, 64 times, we'll just say $500 to keep it easy. That'd be $32,000 that you'd spend on machines, and you'd have a collective 1 megabyte of RAM that couldn't even talk to each. 1 gigabyte of RAM, keep in mind this is 16 gigabytes of RAM, would be 1 million kilobytes. That's 64,000 TIs that you would need in order to just make 1 gigabyte of RAM. That's just a ton of machines. So 16 gigabytes of RAM is going to be 16 million kilobytes, or 1 million TIs. So in order to meet the RAM of this one RAM chip, that's 16 gigabytes, this is DDR3 16 gigabyte, you would need 1 million of these boxes, and you would have a cumulative 16 gigabytes of RAM. That being said, these are all 16 gigabyte chips. These are all the same model. And what I have here, 24 16 gigabyte RAM chips. That's a total of 384 gigabytes of RAM. So on top of this machine that hosts just 16 kilobytes of RAM, I have laid 384 gigabytes, or the equivalent of 24 million TI-99 4As. If you want to know how far technology has come, this is a great comparison. All right, so now that we got that out of the way, we'll talk a little more specific once we're inside. But first, let's put it together, turn it on, and see what happens when we boot this up.
They challenge, encourage, make learning fun. The home computer from Texas Instruments.
Okay, we have our TI set up. We have our video out here. We have our power here. We didn't bother plugging in the joystick because we don't have anything that can use it. And with our little bumpy leg, might have a little bit of this when we type. I'll try to minimize that as much as possible. So the first thing we're gonna do is the built-in basic. So this machine obviously boots from ROM, and the only option is gonna be to boot into basic. So you may have noticed here my Wii U. What else am I going to use it for, right? This is actually attached to a suction cup mount that I have my camera attached to view the screen here. So let's go ahead and turn it on. So as predicted, the static is pretty bad. That's just interference, and that's because I don't have a real connection connect this up to TV with. I'm just splicing the modulator into the coax. So it boots Texas Instruments home computer, copyright 1981 Texas Instruments. If this was the model that did not have the ability to play homebrew cartridges, there would actually be a version number on the screen we don't see. So we did hit our key, and we get one option, press 1 for TI Basic. So you can see if you bought this machine with no cartridges, you're going to be limited to Basic. You're literally going to boot up and have only Basic available to you. So you can see that we do have color, very low resolution. Obviously, this was meant for an old analog TV screen from 1981. It does support multiple colors, as you saw on boot up. Much like our Tandy video, where we expressed that Tandy had a special Tandy sound, the TI-99 had special sound as well. And not so much special as it was just multi-channel sound. Now, if you remember when PCs came out in the early 80s, they mostly had sound generator. It beeped. You threw a hertz number at it and told it to generate a sound, and it generated sound at that hertz whereas the Tandy could generate multi-channel sound. The same with Texas Instruments. And in fact, one of the modules that you could purchase for this was a voice synthesizer. So you could turn text into speech in a very robotic voice. Hope I can find a sample of that online and play a little bit for you. If I can, I'll do that right now.
I am from the year 1983. I am an 8-bit computer with a learning processor. Shortly after being manufactured, I was shipped to a warehouse for distribution. A large 18-wheeler truck hauled my ass to an electronics store. A human, which I classify as a nerd, put a price tag on my box phone, and that really pissed me off. I knew I was soon to be a slave to the human flesh creatures.
So that's that. So let's just do what every person who ever did anything in BASIC did. In fact, I remember going through when I was playing with a Commodore 64 way back in the days. One of the learning BASIC tutorials in the manual that came with it was how to do Hello World. So how do we do Hello World in BASIC? So it's basically the simplest program that you could probably write that does anything more than once. And it's kind of almost a joke in developer jargon about writing your first program. So in BASIC, everything had to have a line number, and you typically use 10, 20, 30 in increments of 10, because if you needed to insert a line, BASIC wasn't real good about that, about inserting lines between other lines. So you did it in increments of 10. So if you needed something between 10 and 20, you could go back in and add it as 15, and it would insert right in there. And of course, you could add any of the other numbers as well to insert other code if you want. So we're going to do the basic Hello World program. And notice that P on there is not the same size as the ones above it. It's a lowercase p, but it's actually not lowercase. It's just the capital P that's shrunk down like we talked about. So I'm going to do the back function. Doesn't work. So let's try the delete function. Doesn't work. So we're just going to use the arrow key. So on this keyboard, arrow keys are S, E, and D, and X actually. So S, E, D, X. Up for E, S left, D right, X down. So to move back and forth, we could hit this function key and move left. So I'm going to type this in caps, and I'm going to hit the caps lock. Notice that it stays down, and see how the P changes to the uppercase version of it. Now for everything else, I'm just going to use lowercase. There are no dedicated keys for other types of characters. So question mark, the quotes, a tilde, brackets, braces, the pipe symbol, and slashes were actually, and you only got backslash. Well, actually you got a / on the keyboard. The backslash is a function code. So if I want to print Hello World, I'm going to hit the function P, which is going to give me my quote. And I'm going to type Hello World in proper case. If I can learn how to type on this keyboard. As I said, it's very difficult to learn this keyboard, given that it's so much different than regular keyboard. So, and print Hello World. So what does that do? That's just going to print Hello World on the screen. And if we ran this, it's just going to say, we're going to type run by doing that, RUN. It's how you ran a basic program. I hit enter, and it runs Hello World. So the next thing we're going to do is have it repeat. We're actually going to remove 10, see if I can remember how to program in BASIC. So 10 for X, is there an equal button on here? Okay, equals 1 to 10. And it likes that. 20, print Hello World. And then 30, next X. So what this should do, it uses standard ANSI BASIC. So what this should do is create a loop and print Hello World 10 times and then stop. And there we are. So we've created our simple Hello World application. I'm wondering if beeps work. Does beep work? Nope, doesn't like it, but it beeps anyway. Boop. So that's a little bit of the sound there. We'll do it again so you can hear that. So we see what happens. There it is. I'm not sure how to generate sound on this in BASIC. I'm not familiar with the BASIC that this would have used way back then. And quite frankly, I haven't programmed in BASIC in so long that I have basically gone back to a rudimentary knowledge of how to do that. So we're going to put this thing into an intimate loop, an infinite loop. Intimate loop would be quite interesting, wouldn't it? So all I'm doing is retyping the line numbers when I list this program out. If I can get the keys right. It's going to tell me it can't do that because I've blanked all the numbers, so there is nothing to list. So when I'll do it again after I write this, but we're going to print. Oh, geez, get this this keyboard right. We're going to print. Still can't do it. Name of our channel here, High Tech Rec. And then we're going to do the infinite loop. What we did is we created a statement called that says print High Tech Rec to the screen, and then 20 is going to go to 10, which will just put this into a big giant loop, and it'll run forever till we turn it off or tell it to stop. I've only figured out how to do that once, and it was by accident, so I'm going to try again and see what happens. So if we say run here, and it's just going to repeat High Tech Rec forever, as long as there's power and it's on and the machine doesn't die. Notice that the screen actually went green instead of blue. That was interesting to me to find out on here. So blue is kind of the edit mode and green is kind of the run mode. So there's a quit option. It's this one right here. It's gray. So I'm assuming that if I hit function equals, it actually becomes a reset. So if I hit it again, even on that screen, I can reset. It's really not quit, really just reset. I'm not sure what break actually is. I did it once and it told me the application broke and it returned me back to an edit mode. But here we are. So we're right back at the screen. And the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to play just a little bit with this because it's, it's boring financial stuff. I'm going to put this cartridge in, which forces a reset. And we're going to hit our key. And notice on our screen now that we actually get two options. So we get one for press 1 for TI Basic or press 2 for Home Finance. So we're going to go ahead and hit 2. And this is going to load the application off of ROM. I'm not sure why we need sound in a Home Finance application, but there it is. So here's some steps here, and it goes away automatically. So basically there's 4 decision areas, and you choose what you want and then answer the questions. So we're just going to do something simple like a car loan. And so we have options here: 1 to buy a car, 2 to buy between 2 different cars, 3 if you'd like to determine if you'd like to lease or buy a car, 4 would be to keep your present car or to buy a new one, 5 would be to keep your present car or to lease a car, or 6 would be early payoff. We're going to hit 1 to buy a car. So we're going to say that we're going to buy a pretty nice car. We're going to pay $52,000 for it. And we're going to put $10,000 down. Right? To buy a $52,000 car, you should probably put down more than $1,000. But let's say we're going to finance that for 5 years, so 60 months. Say we have really great credit, so we're going to get a 1.9% annual interest. So this is going to tell me, even with my $10,000 down payment, I'm going to make 60 monthly payments, 50 of them that are going to be $734.33, and a final payment of $734.33. That's interesting that they're both equal. Usually your last payment's less. and you're going to end up paying a total interest of $2,059.80. So our $52,000 car is ultimately going to cost us $54,059.80. And that's as simple as it gets. It's basically a loan calculator. And if you want to do a house, we'll choose another decision area and we'll say residence. Oh, I think we've actually locked it up. I've never actually seen it do this. It doesn't like that. And the reset doesn't work. Let's power off and power on. Maybe it's like our Tandy. We're halfway through our demonstration, dead in the water. So that's what we have today. So again, I'm going to try and get some games off of eBay. I'll even try to get the SD card cartridge so that maybe we can try a whole bunch of different things without having to track everything down. But that's the software of the TI. So if you want to see what's going on with game software, we're going to save it for another video. So like and subscribe if you would, and leave any of your comments below. If there's a specific game maybe that was one of your favorites on the TI that you'd like to see again, we might try to even get that for you. The video's not over. We're going to turn this off and we're going to take it apart. We're going to look at the insides. I imagine it's probably pretty dusty in there. And we're going to talk about some of the hardware inside, much like we did about the RAM capacity.
They buy the home computer from Texas Instruments and get a $100 rebate. That's a powerful computer. The one with all the memory, right? And the tons of software.
Okay, so we're not sure what we're going to encounter. So we have a number of tools here. So we have a couple of Phillips larger head screwdrivers, some smaller screwdrivers, and some uber small ones. We've got a couple of standard head screwdrivers as well. They're just otherwise known as flatheads. So we're going to set these to the side. And we also have a pair of pliers. So hopefully we don't need these, but we never know. So we have them on hand. So unlike a lot of plastic cases that kind of clip together, these are actually screwed in. There's a bunch of screw holes on the bottom. So there's one in each corner, and then there's one here. I don't think there's any under the feet, so we want to take them off, given that this particular, still a little warm from being on, given that this particular foot doesn't have one under. So we'll start with that, with the screw holes, and it looks like they're Phillips. A little hard to see down there, so let's start there. It looks like that Phillips is this Phillips is too big, so we'll move on to our smaller one. And it looks like we got some bite. Put that here, and we're going to flip it back over and see if it comes loose. It does come loose. Looks like the bottom comes off the top, not the top off the bottom. So we'll flip this back over. And we've got a little bit of a hang up in. All right, so that's the power button. Probably pops off somehow. If I take a look at this off screen, see if I can figure out what's going on. Okay, so we figured out this just clips on. Let's get over silver. It's a little. This is just a little clip on here that goes in through a hole and connects to the switch inside. And it's thought maybe that would just slide out, but it didn't. Have to pop it loose. So again, the bottom comes off, not the top. Here's the bottom. We're just going to set that to the side. Explore. So it looks like the power connector doesn't actually get held in by anything except the plastic. So it's just kind of a pinch fitting here. So we'll turn this around. So it immediately came loose because there's no screws or anything in it. And then everything else is held in by screws. So this is going to be our keyboard here. You can see PCB is pretty simple, just a bunch of lines, no electronics. All of this metal is going to be shielding. It looks like there's a little rust right here. It looks like, interesting, it looks like somebody actually sandpapered it. It's a little, maybe, you can see right in the edges, there's rust here, right there at the end of my finger. There's little lines in there, like somebody sanded something off. You can see the grit pour into the other stuff. Since rusted there, coated. Maybe maybe they intended to attach a ground or something there, and they needed to remove the coating, and then manufacturing did that, and they grounded it some other way. There's plenty of screws in it, so I'm not sure what they would have been grounding there, but it is what it is. So this is our power connection. This looks like it goes, our power switch module. I'm guessing this is the entire internal power supply. It looks like our power goes straight to it. First thing we'll want to do is remove this tape. So in case you're wondering, this is Scotch tape. They've put this together with Scotch tape. 1981, Scotch tape was the way to go. You might want to wrap your Christmas presents with. So looks like there's one screw, two screws holding this in. And this module should be loose now. Be careful touching it because there's going to be capacitors on here, and they're probably still charged. These old machines were not designed, especially there's no ground plug, and maybe the transformer does something weird, but my guess is this transformer or this capacitor is fully charged here. This big barrel-like thing here, a cylinder. There's a couple of other ones on here too. Usually if it would be bad, these would be what would be bad. They seem to still be working. So I've just got to be careful touching the back of this thing, and I don't want to stick my finger on there and get a little pop. Probably wouldn't hurt me, but it would make me question my life for a moment. Looks like that's going to be the actual switch. So that little piece, how that actually fit on there. So this would go in, it would connect to this, slide it back and forth. Power on and off. Here's our power LED, and it's just basic because all of the power supply itself is actually in the brick that we plugged into the wall. So let's move on from that. We got to figure out where this connects up, and to do that, we got to take off this shield. So we're going to lay that out front. Actually, you see that this connector is removable. We can get this out of the way by undoing our connector here. So let's look around before we take anything else. Looks like the next thing we have to take off is our shield. So let's go ahead and do that. Yes, this is actually not plastic grabber screw, and I think I heard a nut that goes on the other end of this fall inside. So let's see if we can get that out. Or the other piece of our switch on the internal side there. So there we are. We do have a keyboard connector holding us in place here. Notice the green connector. See if we can figure out how to get that out. So it just looks like something we can pry loose. Flat screwdriver, and it does come loose. And there we have it. So this was just the connector plugged into these pins here. This is a keyboard connector. All it seems to really be doing is you press a key, it connects some things and sends a signal interpreted as a key. So We're actually not going to take the keyboard out because it's just it's just going to look like this without the case on it. There's nothing there, and there's a big chunk of metal on the of it, make it sturdy. So we're going to leave that alone and leave it in there. And so here is our main board. This is going to be the entire computer minus the keyboard and the power, of course. So this is our card connection. So when we plug something in, it actually connects there. We'll do that again on camera this time. Slide that out. So here's our joystick port 1, our video port. Our power port's missing because it was connected to the board. And here's our other joystick here. So they've got this shielded pretty good. So this is going to be a pressure clamp. It's not screwed in or anything. It just kind of holds things together. And it looks like there's some holes there, but you can see as soon as I took that off, this becomes loose. So it just goes right over there. And you can see that the size isn't going to fit unless you force it on. And that's just to hold it together. So let's go ahead and take our screws out here. And like we have another pressure clamp, sorry. Take off this here. There's another one. And then now we'll take the screws out and we'll pull this apart. Right, here we go. That's pretty simple. Got some old handprints in here from assembly. The oil has caused a change in the metal over time. We're going to set this to the side. Now our top plate. I was thinking that we couldn't get this plate off because of this expansion card poking through. Looks like there's an add-on here, and I was thinking maybe for a second that this part was pushed through the metal and that this part would have been added maybe by hand. But it looks like this is just a card that plugs into another slot. We should be able to pop out. And so this is really just a riser card. That's all we really have here. So again, this is where our game cartridges and the software would plug into. Okay, that was simple enough. Now let's reveal the other side. Ooh, here we go. Bunch of chips. All right, so let's discover this together. So I see a number of socketed chips here. Those are pretty interesting. Almost as if they intended to maybe upgrades. And look at these wires, engineering errors. Really what this is. So they've connected some resistors over here to some points over here. It looks like another resistor connected into something over here. Goes to this red resistor here. And then I'm not even sure what this bar is. Probably ground. So it looks like they might be grounding, attaching all the ground points together on a single location to this piece of metal. And it looks like there's two more here. Also, actually, I take that back. These are probably shields. So these are soldered onto the ground and acting as shields to shield chip their any distortion they'd cause the other chips, shielding them away from me. So this is actually going to be extremely old thermal grease. Look at the bottom of our top here. You can see that there's actually a heat sink there, just a chunk of metal. It was pressed down on that to make contact. It's long dry. We'll actually replace this when we put it back together. Modern Arctic silvers, just to make sure that bond. But it fit like this. Guessing this is the. I guess that this is the CPU, but I do believe this is the CPU. This is a TMS-9900. So a little bit of history on the TMS-9900. So this is the CPU. It is a 16-bit CPU. However, almost all communications that were created to items everywhere was through 8-bit. So a 16-bit CPU, 8-bit. I want to call it the bus, but I'm not even sure they called it that then. So like if you put an expansion port on one of these, an expansion card on one of these machines, it actually was an 8-bit, and it took 2 cycles to actually do anything because it would have to convert it to 8-bit, and then it would have to transmit it out, then send it back and convert it to 16-bit for the processor to use it. But this is a chip from 1976. It was the first 16-bit processor that's used in here. It ran at a whopping 3 megahertz. By today's standards, I think my digital watch runs faster. So there is a graphics processor here. I'm wondering if it's this particular chip. I can't really see. The TMS-9901. So this would have had the TMS-9918A in it as the graphics processor. Just trying to wipe that off. Let me pause and get a second. Okay, so now that this is off, this is indeed the TMS-9918ML. This is the graphics processing unit and the GPU. It was actually the same processor that you got when you same GPU that you got when you purchased a ColecoVision. If you're old school like myself, you played many games on ColecoVision, you would have gotten the same exact graphics power from that ColecoVision as you got from the TI-99 4A. The other interesting note is Sega's very first console, the SG-1000, also used the same GPU. So it's actually had some life in it. You could probably still buy these in some variant today, obviously way out of manufacture, but there were a lot of them on the market. This machine actually sold about 20 million units plus in its just few years of life. So ColecoVision sold a ton of units. I'm not sure how many the Sega sold. It was primarily overseas markets. We're in the US here. But it's a very high count for manufacturing. So moving in a little further here, believing this is probably the RAM here. Everything is TMS, so Texas Instruments here. This appears to be the RAM. It has a designation of 150 nanoseconds. So this is a 16K of RAM. And there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 chips, which would have been 1 chip for each bit. It would have been 16 kilobit chips, 1 chip for each bit. And then the 9th chip would have been a parity chip. If you're unfamiliar with parity, it creates a check bit. So any chip in the series could go bad, and the parity chip could correct that. And the way it did that is it did this kind of math thing where it would count up the number of bits. Let's just say it counted the number of ones in the series, and if it were an odd number, it would store that in the parity bit as an odd number, a 1. And then when it read that bank, if it had an error reading, say bank number 5 here, it couldn't get what the value was. It could go to the parity chip, and if this were odd, then that number would have been a 1. That bit would have been a 1. If this number were 0, or can't really say even on 0, but if it were 0, 1, 1 would have indicated that the missing bit was 1, and 0 would have indicated the missing bit was 0. And that would work for any chip as long as only 1 chip was bad. If you lost 2 chips, it was game over. So these 2 chips here are Motorola chips. When I looked these up, it turns out that they're 128 bits times 8, which one of these chips are 128 bits. My belief is that the TI-99 4A came with 256 bits of what they called scratch RAM. So that was RAM. Today we'd probably call that cache. So in our processors today, the new Ryzen 5900s are coming out with 32 meg of cache. So in this particular processor would have came with 256 bytes of cache. So what's that memory different than this bank of RAM over here? Is that this memory was directly accessible by the processor at 16 bits, but communicating to this RAM over here actually was only at 8 bits. So it was a much faster data width in order to communicate with this. So there's probably somewhere on here buried a sound chip. I guess it's one of these smaller ones. However, I'm not going to actually go through every single chip on here, try to determine. It might even be these removable ones here. These 4 wires in the back here are our power connector lines. So those 4 going in here. There's a ton of resistors on this board, capacitors. See a couple of diodes here and there. There's one right there. And that's about it. It doesn't get much simpler, even though this was extremely complicated back in the day. But it doesn't get much simpler than this. We're going to put this back together, and we'll come back with a little bit of history, and then we'll wrap everything up.
Hi there. You know who I am, and I know that you're bored now, aren't you? I know, yes. But I'm going to take something and begin to say it, and it's going to unbore you.
Slow? Yes, we're gonna have to go right to ludicrous speed.
Covered the rusted portion. This was sanded in order to make contact with this, in order to provide an additional contact point for grounding. Interesting. Didn't notice that. Back together, no leftover parts, always a good sign. We're going to turn it back on just to make sure that everything still works. Back together. It'll be a little staticky. There we go. All right. Whew. That was a breakdown. All right, let's sum this up. So I'm going to reference my notes a little bit because a lot of information and I didn't really know any of it before. So the TI-99 4A was the first 16-bit home computer. It might have actually been the TI-99 4, but neither here nor there. It ran at 3 megahertz for the 16-bit CPU that talked to all other components at 8 bits, which required 2 cycles in order to communicate with anything, therefore slowing all communication down by half. It came with 16 kilobytes of RAM. You could get a 32K RAM expansion module, and it cost $525 in June of 1981. It owned about 35% of the home market in 1982 and peaked in 1983 in the first quarter, selling about 30,000 units a week, a ridiculous amount of units. I misquoted before saying that this machine sold 20 million units. It actually sold about 2 million units, not quite 3 million units, just a little less than 3 million units, and ultimately died in the third quarter of 1983 simply because it was too expensive to manufacture, and Texas Instruments could not compete with other home computers on the market like the VIC-20. The VIC-20 selling at $200 when it first debuted, and even selling at $99 a short time later, whereas the TI-99 4A was going to be reduced to $300 with a $100 rebate, and then ultimately it came as some sort of weird package deal where you could get a bunch of peripherals for that price or less as well. So the video that is in here is the TMS 9918A, as we talked about, which also came in the ColecoVision and came in Sega's first console, the SG-1000. We didn't talk about the graphics capability when we were discussing the chip inside. So it is a color display, and it could actually handle character and bitmap images. And it could also do sprites. If you're not familiar with sprites, just think of a bitmap that can be moved around on the screen without having to redraw the whole screen. The drawback was those sprites wasn't really a drawback for the time. The capability of those sprites really were you could have 8 pixels by 8 pixels, or you could have 16 pixels by 16 pixel sprites. Now, each of those sprites could be enlarged 2x. So 8 by x sprites could be magnified to 16 by 16, and the 16 by 16 could be magnified to 30 by 32. The limitation on processing is that any single scan line on the screen could only handle 4 sprites at a time. I don't know if there was a limit. I presume there's some upper limit on the number of total sprites. However, as long as you didn't put more than 4 sprites on the same scan line, you were okay. So what that meant is your screen is divided into lines just like they are today. A 1080p monitor has 1080 horizontal lines of resolution. And you can put, by today's graphics card, you can put as much as you want on there almost. But let's just say that you had Pac-Man playing on this particular game. Pac-Man has 4 ghosts, and it has Pac-Man. That would be 5 sprites. So this game would be computer would be incapable of actually putting Pac-Man and the 4 ghosts on the same line of dots in the game at the same time because it was limited to 4. I'm not sure how they would have gotten around a limitation like that. And they would have had to at least been spaced. Let's just say that Pac-Man is using the 16 by 16 sprite. So once you had 3 ghosts and Pac-Man in the same 16 pixels, or same line of rows where any of those 16 pixels crossed, as long as there were 4 on the same row, another ghost would not be able to move in line with all of the other sprites. Again, not sure how they would handle that. Maybe there's not a Pac-Man for this particular computer, but if there is, maybe the algorithm is to avoid that situation, and the 4th ghost just kind of does the whole kung fu movie thing where he waits around for his buddies to get beat up before he jumps in and joins the fight in order to avoid that 5th sprite being on the scan line. So text was uppercase and lowercase, with lowercase being just a subset of uppercase, not its own individual character. So just simply tagging the uppercase letter as a lowercase letter and then then kind of zooming out, if you will, and making the uppercase letter just a smaller version of itself in order to get that. So storage could have been on cassette or on floppy drives, and you could connect a number of floppy drives up to this. They would have been full height 360K, maybe not 360K, maybe 180K floppies, single-sided at that time. That you could storage. You could use cartridge based for software, but you couldn't save to these. But there were a number of games and other utilities and all sorts of education things that you could buy on cartridge. And the games that you play did have could have used joysticks, as you saw the joysticks at the beginning. They were actually, honestly, they're actually quite rare. What I was reading online, that it was a little bit hard to find the joysticks then, and probably harder to find them now. So I think I'm actually kind of lucky that I got them. I just hope to get some games that can use them. The computer was capable of multi-voice sound, and one of the expansion modules actually voice synthesizer. Now, while I don't have a voice synthesizer, I was lucky enough when I was a teenager that one of my best friends actually had a TI-99 4A and had a speech synthesizer for it. Now, that would have been 1988. So this machine would have only been, about 5 years out of production at that point, much more common. He had one he didn't use. He had moved on to an Apple IIc, and I was using some derivative homebrew 286 compatible. One of the notable peripherals for this particular machine was called the EB. Maybe it's pronounced PEB, I'm not sure, but it was the peripheral expansion box. I'll show you a picture of that right here. And that allowed you to put up to 8 expansion cards in there, including floppy drives, condense what could have been a multi-peripheral chain of devices that would have just become unusable on any normal desk. And again, you could have bought this for $525 back in 1982, which would have been a significant decrease in price from the TI-99 4A that came out in 1979. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for the TI-99 4A. I'm sorry to bore you, but if you liked being bored and you want to see more, please like and subscribe. Leave your comments, good or bad, down below. We read them all. We even reply to them as well. So maybe you have something you want to see us do, a particular piece of hardware, or maybe you have something on the TI-99 you'd like to see us get our hands on and demonstrate that. Stay tuned for other videos such as basic on the TI-99 and games on the TI-99 coming up hopefully in a very short time. Have a great day.